Welcome, listeners. Before we begin, a brief content note. This story contains themes of disappearance, implied harm to minors, and environmental horror centered around thresholds, homes, and the idea of welcome being weaponized. There is no graphic violence, but the unease is sustained and intentional. Listener discretion is advised. There are houses you avoid because they frighten you, and then there are houses you avoid because they don't. This is a story about the second kind, about a place everyone agreed was empty, about a town that mistook cleanliness for safety, and about what happens when something learns that politeness is the fastest way inside. Tonight's story is called Welcome. Come in, stay. And once you've heard it, you may find yourself hesitating a little longer at doorways. And now the record begins here. Welcome, come in, stay, by NoSleep scribe. Nobody in Briar Hollow knew who had left the welcome mat on the front porch of the old Granger house. For years, the place had been a fixture of neglect. Shuttered windows filmed with dust, gray paint lifting in long strips like old scabs, the porch sagging inward as though tired of holding itself together. Children cut across the yard on their way home from school because it was quicker and because the house had long since lost its power to scare anyone. Adults averted their eyes out of habit, not fear. It was a dead thing, finished. That was why the mat stood out so starkly that morning. Emma saw it first while walking her dog before school. The air was crisp, the kind of October cold that sharpened everything. The smell of leaves, the crunch of gravel, the distant sound of someone starting a car. She almost missed the mat entirely, her eyes already trained to slide past the house. Then the yellow caught her. It sat squarely in front of the door, perfectly aligned with the boards of the porch. New, bright, cheerful in a way that felt inappropriate, like laughter at a funeral. A huge smiley face filled most of its surface. The curved mouth stretched wide and confident, the eyes round and unblinking. Welcome, it read in thick black letters. Emma slowed. Her dog tugged at the leash, nails clicking on the sidewalk. She didn't step onto the grass. She didn't need to get closer to feel it. Something about the mat made her uneasy. Not because it was there, but because it looked like it expected to be. As she stood there, Mrs. Calder emerged from her front door 2 houses down, keys in hand, purse slung over her shoulder. She glanced toward the Granger house, squinted, and let out a soft laugh. "Well, I'll be," she said, crossing the street. "About time someone tried to make that place look decent." Emma opened her mouth to say something. What, she wasn't sure. But her dog chose that moment to lunge after a leaf. The leash jerked in her hand. She stumbled forward, one foot slipping off the curve. Mrs. Calder, already halfway up the Granger porch, didn't notice. She stepped squarely onto the mat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Mrs. Calder paused. She looked down at her feet, brow furrowing, not in fear, but confusion. She lifted one foot, turned it slightly, then set it back down. "Huh," she murmured. "That's odd." "What?" Emma asked. Mrs. Calder smiled, embarrassed. "My shoe was a bit muddy. Must have stepped in something earlier." She rubbed the sole against the mat once, then stepped off and back onto the porch boards. She glanced again, then laughed. "Well, I'll be clean as a whistle now." Emma stared at the mat. The yellow looked the same, the smile unchanged, but just for a second she thought the surface between Mrs. Calder's foot had yielded, not sunk, not moved, just accepted the pressure in a way rubber shouldn't. Mrs. Calder didn't notice. She waved, adjusted her purse, and went on her way, shoes spotless. Emma crossed the street without thinking, heart beating faster than it should have. By noon, half the town had noticed. Mrs. Calder told the story twice at the grocery store, chuckling. "Best mat I've ever seen," she said. "Did a better job than the one I've got at home." The mail carrier paused longer than usual at the Granger box, staring at the porch with a thoughtful expression. A real estate sign was rumored, then dismissed. No one could remember seeing a truck. No one had heard any hammering. That evening, just as the sun dipped low enough to stain the windows orange, the porch light flickered on. The light fixture hadn't worked in decades. The wiring had been stripped years ago. Everyone knew that. The bulb glowed anyway, casting a soft yellow cone over the porch and the mat beneath it. It stayed on for less than a minute, long enough to be noticed, long enough to be talked about. The kids talked about it the most. They gathered at the end of the block as they always did, bikes tossed in the grass, backpacks abandoned. The Granger house loomed at the far end of the street, half hidden by trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn. "I bet someone sneaks in at night," Yuki said quietly. "They wouldn't want anyone to see them fixing it." Luke scoffed. "Fixing what? They didn't fix the house, they fixed the porch light." He grinned. "That's not fixing, that's showing off." Grace folded her arms. "Or it's someone creepy. My mom says people who mess with abandoned houses are usually weird." She glanced toward the porch. "That mat is weird." "It's just a mat," Luke said, though he didn't look at it. "My mom says abandoned houses don't want visitors," Emma said. "They want to be forgotten." Luke snorted. "Houses don't want things." As if in response, the porch light flickered. Once, twice. Then it stayed on. No one spoke. The smiley face on the mat caught the light perfectly, the curved mouth gleaming as if it had been polished. For just a second, no longer than that, Emma thought the eyes looked deeper than paint, dark and glossy like they were wet. Grace took a step back. "Okay," she said, "that's enough. I don't like it." Luke swallowed. His grin had thinned, but it was still there. "It's nothing, just coincidence." But none of them suggested going closer. Across the street, the Granger house stood quiet and patient, its doors closed, its porch lit, its welcome laid neatly at its feet, waiting for someone to decide it was meant for them. By the next afternoon, the Granger house had stopped being a mystery and started being a topic. It came up the way weather did, casually, repeatedly, without resolution. Adults mentioned it while unloading groceries. Kids pointed it out on their walk home. Someone joked that the house had better manners than most people in Briar Hollow these days. The porch light stayed off during the day. The mat didn't. It looked unchanged in the sunlight, bright yellow, cartoonish, absurdly clean. No leaves stuck to it. No dust dulled its surface. Even after a windy night, it sat perfectly square to the door, as though it had been measured. That was what finally convinced Luke to go closer. They stood at the edge of the Granger yard, sneakers sinking slightly into the soft earth. Grace hovered behind him, arms crossed tight against her chest. Emma lingered near the sidewalk. Yuki stood apart, fingers whirring the small bells on her bracelet until they barely made a sound. "We're not going inside," Grace said, for what must have been the fourth time. "We're not even going on the porch." "I know," Luke said, rolling his eyes. "I'm not stupid." He took a few careful steps forward, stopping just short of the porch boards. Up close, the mat was worse. The yellow wasn't flat. It had a depth to it, like layers built up over time. The smiley face wasn't cracked or worn, despite how new it looked. No creases, no signs of bending. The black letters spelling welcome were thick and slightly raised, the edges soft instead of sharp. "See," Luke said, gesturing, "it's just rubber." "Rubber doesn't do that," Emma said quietly. She was staring at the bottom edge of the mat where it met the wood. A thin line of darkness showed beneath it, deeper than the shadow the porch should have cast. She couldn't tell if the mat was flushed with the boards or if it hovered just barely. Luke crouched. Grace sucked in a sharp breath. "Luke!" "I'm not stepping on it," he said. "Relax." He reached out and pressed 2 fingers lightly against the corner. The mat was warm, not sun warm, not lingering heat of the day, warm in the way a hand was warm, or breath. Luke pulled his fingers back instinctively. "What?" Grace asked. "It's..." He hesitated, clearly annoyed at himself. "It's nothing, just warm." Yuki shook her head. "It knows you're here now." Luke snorted, but his hand had gone to his jeans, wiping his fingers without him realizing it. "It's a mat, Yuki." He reached out again. This time he nudged the edge of it with his knuckles, just enough to lift it. The underside wasn't rubber. It was fibrous, dense, layered in tight, bristly strands that flexed and shifted minutely, like something that didn't appreciate being disturbed. Luke dropped it immediately. The mat settled back into place without a sound. No one spoke. Then Luke laughed, too loudly. "Okay, gross. Still not haunted." Grace stared at his hand. "Why are you shaking then?" "I'm not." "You are." Emma swallowed. "Let's just go." They turned to leave. Behind them, something made a soft, almost inaudible sound. Not a voice, not a footstep. A polite little thump, as if something had been set down carefully. They all looked back. At the center of the mat, between the smiley face's eyes, sat a small, bright yellow sticker. A star, the kind teachers gave out for good behavior. None of them remembered it being there before. Luke stepped closer without thinking, then stopped himself short. The porch light flickered once above his head, though the sun was still high. Grace backed away. "Nope, I don't like that." "It's just a sticker," Luke said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Someone probably put it there." "Who?" Emma asked. "When?" No one answered. Yuki's eyes were fixed on the star. "It's saying thank you." "For what?" Grace whispered. Yuki didn't respond. The sticker stayed. The next morning, the star was gone. In its place, a small pot of yellow plastic tulips sat neatly to the right of the door. They were spotless, their stems straight, their petals unbent. They didn't move in the breeze. At school, Luke noticed something odd during gym. His sneakers were clean. Not just clean, polished. The scuffed white rubber along the sides gleamed like it had been scrubbed. When he bent down to check, he saw faint yellow fibers clinging to the tread, tangled so tightly he had to pick them out with his fingernails. They didn't come loose easily. That night, when he kicked his shoes off by the door, he didn't remember doing it. In the morning, they were lined up neatly on the mat inside his house, perfectly parallel, toes pointing inward. They met after dark. No one said the word sneak, but that's what it was. Pajamas hidden under hoodies, flashlights wrapped in socks to dull the beams. Curfews obeyed just closely enough to feel plausible. Luke led the way, because of course he did. The streets looked different at night, smaller, quieter. The houses leaned inward, listening. Porch lights glowed in uneven patches, leaving long stretches of shadow between them. The Granger house sat at the far end, its windows black, its roofline jagged against the moon. The porch light was on. It hadn't been earlier. Emma was sure of it. She'd checked from her bedroom window before climbing out. The light spilled down onto the porch boards and the welcome mat beneath it. The mat looked fuller, not larger, just more present. Its yellow deeper, richer, like fresh paint laid over old layers. The smiley face shone with quiet confidence. The black eyes reflected the porch light perfectly. Grace slowed first. "Okay," she whispered. "We can still turn around." Luke didn't answer. He was staring at the mat. Yuki hovered at the edge of the sidewalk, fingers knotted in her charm bracelet. The bells were silent now. She hadn't let them chime since that afternoon. "It knows we came back," she said. Luke forced a grin. "It's a house." Emma swallowed. "Then why does it look like it's been waiting?" They crossed the yard together. The grass was damp, but there was no mud. No leaves clung to their shoes. Even the ground seemed unusually clean, packed firm beneath their feet. The porch boards creaked as Luke stepped up, but not in protest. The sound was low, slow, almost satisfied. "Don't step on it," Grace hissed. "I know," Luke said, stopping just short of the mat. His sneaker hovered inches above the smiley face. Up close, the smell hit them. Not rot, not mold. Old carpet, dry dust, the faint tang of leather shoes left too long in a closet. Emma gagged quietly. The word welcome looked different at night. The letters were darker, the edges slightly blurred, as if they'd been pressed down repeatedly by passing feet. Emma realized with a jolt that the smudges weren't random. They curved inward, towards the door. Yuki sucked in a breath. "It wants us to wipe." "No," Grace said immediately. "Nope, absolutely not." Luke laughed, short, sharp. "Nobody's wiping anything." As if offended, the porch light flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. From inside the house came a sound. Soft, deliberate. Shk, shk. Emma froze. "What is that?" The sound came again. Shk, shk. Luke's face had gone pale. "Someone's inside." "No," Yuki whispered. Her eyes were locked on the mat. "That's not footsteps." The sound shifted, slower now, heavier, like something dragging the bottom of shoes carefully across a surface, cleaning them. The front door shuddered, not opening, just leaning, as though something on the other side had pressed close enough to feel the wood. Grace grabbed Luke's sleeve. We have to go now. Luke didn't move. His foot lowered just a fraction before he caught himself. The mat reacted, not dramatically, not visibly. The warmth rose through the air, sudden and unmistakable. Luke gasped and jerked his foot back, stumbling. The smiley face's mouth deepened, not wider, deeper, like pressure had been applied from below. The brushing sound stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and expectant. Then, tap. Something struck the inside of the door. Once, twice, right at the threshold. Yuki whimpered. "It's knocking." "Why?" Luke whispered. "It wants us to open the door." Her voice trembled. The porch boards creaked again. This time none of them had moved. The mat shifted just a little, a subtle rise and fall, like breathing. Grace screamed. The door opened, not outward, inward. Darkness poured from the doorway, swallowing the porch light at its edges. The inside of the house was wrong, too deep, too wide, as if the space beyond the door didn't match the shape of the building. No one stood there, but the smell intensified, layered now with damp earth and something faintly sweet. A voice slid out of the darkness, not loud, not clear, threaded with overlapping tones, like many mouths trying to agree. "Welcome," it said. The word lingered, waited. "Come in." Something moved inside the dark, not forward, sideways, like shifting weight. Luke broke first. He grabbed Grace's hand and yanked her backward, nearly tripping down the steps. Emma bolted after them, her flashlight clattering uselessly across the porch boards. Yuki hesitated half a second longer, long enough to feel something brush her ankle, gentle as fingers adjusting a sock. She ran. Behind them the porch light snapped off. The door closed, not slammed, placed. The house returned to silence. But Luke woke with sore ankles. Emma found dirt beneath her toenails she couldn't wash away. Grace's shoes were missing. And Yuki's charm bracelet, the one with the bells, was lined up neatly on her windowsill, each charm polished, facing inward. That morning, the mat was gone. So were the tulips. The porch boards were bare, pale where the mat had rested, as if something had been lifted after a long time. The Granger house looked abandoned again, and 3 8th graders had disappeared. They'd told friends they were going to check out the Granger house, just to see if it was really empty again, just to prove it was over. Search parties found nothing. The town grieved quietly. The search lasted 3 days. Dogs tracked nothing. Helicopters circled and found only trees. Volunteers walked the road until their feet ached and their voices went hoarse, calling names that never answered back. The Granger house was searched twice. The door opened easily. Inside, the air was stale but undisturbed. Dust lay thick and even across the floorboards. Cobwebs stretched unbroken from corner to corner. No footprints, no marks. No sign that anyone had crossed the threshold in years. The report used words like unremarkable and empty. The town clung to those words. The 8th graders were not declared dead. Not at first. They were listed as missing, as though they might simply wander back one morning, sheepish and cold, shoes muddy from wherever they'd been hiding. But days passed, then weeks. Their lockers were cleared, their desks reassigned. Their names slipped gradually out of conversation, the way names always did when saying them too often hurt. Parents stopped looking at the Granger house when they drove by. Children stopped cutting through the yard. The place returned to its old shape, abandoned, sagging, forgettable. Relief settled in, life resumed. And then, in another town far away, a neighbor noticed the porch light across the street glowing softly at dusk. The house had been empty for years. Everyone knew that. Still, there it was. A bright yellow welcome mat lay neatly at its door, its smile wide and confident. The word welcome was stamped in thick black letters, the edges slightly blurred as though pressed again and again by passing feet. A small star sticker gleamed at the center, peeling just a bit at one corner. Beside the door sat a pot of yellow plastic tulips, spotless and straight. The neighbor hesitated at the sidewalk, shoes damp with mud from the afternoon rain. For a moment she considered crossing the street. Instead, she wiped her feet on her own mat at home. When she stepped inside, her shoes were cleaner than they had any right to be. That night, she dreamed of standing barefoot at a doorway that felt familiar. In the morning, she found her shoes lined up neatly by the door, parallel, toes pointing inward. And somewhere, very quietly, something that was learning to be more welcoming waited to entertain guests again. Epilogue. Pursuant to Department of Anomaly Analysis and Administration threshold containment protocols, personnel are advised that lack of measurable activity is to be interpreted as post-engagement stabilization, not anomaly dormancy. Items associated with initial manifestation, welcome mats, artificial flora, adhesive symbols, illumination at points of entry, are classified as behavioral anchors. Anchors are not to be removed, tested, photographed, or discussed, as interaction has been shown to refine response accuracy. Field notes should avoid evaluative language, for example, clean, orderly, improved. In cases where footwear is discovered aligned without conscious placement, parallel orientation, inward facing, no corrective action is authorized. Document timestamp only. Exit the structure via the nearest non-threshold point. Additional reporting is unnecessary. The anomaly does not exhibit pursuit behaviors. Historical data indicates escalation is correlated exclusively with hospitality. Case footer for record completion only. Clearance, black umbra. Status, closed, conditions met. Disposition, no further action required. Relocation risk, negligible, see prior incidents. Follow-up, not scheduled. Closure reflects absence of observable activity within the original structure. Personnel are reminded that migratory anomalies meeting stabilization criteria are considered resolved for administrative purposes, regardless of downstream manifestations. Any subsequent occurrences are to be treated as unrelated unless recurrence presents at the same address. File closed.